In an era when rule was measured by strength and health, Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem, emerged. A young, ailing man, he defied his fate, ascending the throne before the age of 20, as his body slowly decayed. Despite accusations that his illness was divine wrath, he achieved what others could not. He defeated Saladin, defended Jerusalem for years, and led armies while nearly incapacitated. It is the story of a king who ruled knowing his life would be short, leaving behind an open question in the pages of history. Would the fall of Jerusalem have occurred had Baldwin lived longer? Welcome to this new video in our series on military leaders, where today we delve into the life of one of the greatest military commanders. He is one of the most tragic and magnificent figures of the Middle Ages, the story of the king who fought the world while fighting his own body. Baldwin IV, later known as King of Jerusalem, was born around the summer of 1161, most likely in Jerusalem, though the exact date and place of his birth are unknown. His father was Amalric, Count of Jaffa, and Ascalon, one of the kingdom's most prominent nobles and a member of the royal family. His brother was King Baldwin III. The child was named after his uncle, the king, who also served as his godfather at his christening. However, young Baldwin soon lost this uncle, as Baldwin III died in 1163 without an heir. Amalric ascended the throne, and Baldwin, not yet 2 years old, became the rightful heir to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. His mother was Agnes de Courtet, from a noble family with roots in both Western Europe and the Levant, and close ties to the royal house. She bore Amalric 2 children, Baldwin and his older sister Sibylla, who would later play a pivotal role in his life. Despite her high status, Agnes never became queen. Church officials objected to her marriage to Amalric on the grounds of consanguinity, forcing Amalric to annul the marriage so he could be crowned king. He later married Maria Comnenus, a daughter of the Byzantine imperial family, but they had only one daughter, leaving Baldwin as the undisputed heir. Baldwin was born into a turbulent world, the Crusader states of the Levant, entities that had existed for only about 60 years. After being the heart of the early Christian world, the region had fallen under Muslim control since the 7th century. The conflict intensified with the expansion of the Ottoman Empire in the 11th century, leading to the First Crusade and the establishment of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and other Crusader states in 1099. However, these states did not enjoy long periods of stability, as they faced growing Islamic resistance from an early stage, led by figures such as Imad ad-Din Zengi and Nur ad-Din. It was in this tense context that Baldwin IV grew up. With official documents scarce, historians rely on a number of contemporary chronicles, most notably the chronicle of William of Tyre, Archbishop of Tyre, who was Baldwin's tutor and one of the most important witnesses of his time, as well as the chronicles of Arnul and Bernard Alcazan, and other Latin, Byzantine, and Arabic sources. Despite their number, these sources remain limited, leaving the picture of Baldwin incomplete. Baldwin spent his childhood in Jerusalem, at a court with a distinctly military character, where the defence of the kingdom was paramount. He received an exceptional education from William of Tyre, one of the most learned scholars of the Latin East, and learned horsemanship from an Arab tutor named Abu al-Khair, reflecting the practical coexistence between Christians and Muslims of that era. It was during his stay at William's house that the first signs of the disease that would mark his life appeared: leprosy. William noticed that the boy felt no pain while playing, only to later discover that part of his arm had lost sensation. a discovery that marked the beginning of a tragedy for a king who would rule with the seeds of his own destruction in his body. As time passed, any doubt about Baldwin's health dissipated. William of Tyre and later the physicians realized that the loss of sensation in his limbs was not a passing phase, but a sign of a serious and incurable disease. Despite attempts at treatment with ointments, poultices, and even incantations, all efforts proved fruitless. By the time Baldwin reached adolescence, it was clear he had advanced leprosy. Even with the assistance of prominent Arab physicians such as Abu Sulaiman Dawood, no effective cure could be found, and the disease became a decisive factor in shaping the king's life and future. The heir's illness was not Amalric's only concern. From the moment he ascended the throne, he pursued an aggressive policy against the Muslim powers surrounding the kingdom, exploiting the weakness of the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, where he achieved successes that strengthened Jerusalem's southern borders. But the greatest danger came from the north, when the Crusader forces suffered a disastrous defeat at the hands of Nur ad-Din at the Battle of Harem in 1164, plunging the Crusader kingdoms into a difficult defensive posture. Faced with these threats, Amalric sought an alliance with the Byzantines by marrying Maria Comnenus. During these years, Baldwin's illness was concealed as much as possible due to the religious and social stigma associated with leprosy, which was seen as divine punishment. Although Latin societies in the Levant showed a degree of tolerance towards lepers compared to Europe, the disease remained a serious problem for the heir to the throne, especially given the expectation of social isolation, a situation unsuitable for a king expected to lead armies. This increased Amalric's anxiety about the succession, which remained unresolved until his untimely death in 1174 from dysentery. Baldwin, then around 13 years old, ascended the throne of Jerusalem under a temporary regency. During the regency, a political vacuum emerged in the Islamic world following Nur ad-Din's death. This vacuum was quickly filled by Saladin, who unified Egypt and Syria under his rule, becoming the greatest threat to the kingdom. Aware of his precarious health, Baldwin began considering the question of succession early on, as his illness prevented him from marrying and having children. His sister Sibylla emerged as a potential heir, especially after her marriage to William of Montgesard, but the latter's death in 1177 thwarted any plans for abdication. As his health deteriorated, Baldwin relied on military commanders to lead campaigns, most notably Renaud of Châtillon, one of the most aggressive Crusader nobles. In 1177, faced with a surprise attack by Saladin on the kingdom's territory, Baldwin, despite his illness, was forced to personally lead the defence. At Montgesard, the Crusaders surprised Saladin's scattered forces, and Baldwin and Renaud led a daring counterattack with their heavy cavalry, resulting in a crushing defeat for the Ayyubid army. This victory was one of the highlights of Baldwin IV's reign, and proved that the ailing king, despite his weakened body, was still capable of challenging his greatest adversaries. Saladin's retreat after Montgesard descended into bloody chaos, with many of his men killed, including one of his nephews. The darkness of night only exacerbated the disarray. In the following days, Baldwin and Renaud pursued the remnants of the Ayyubid army, isolating scattered groups and capturing many. Montgesard's victory was decisive, securing Jerusalem for several years and granting Baldwin, despite his illness, a new status as a victorious king. Stories of St. George's apparitions on the battlefield boosted morale, and a Benedictine monastery was erected on the battle site to commemorate the victory, which coincided with St. Catherine's feast day. Following this, Philip of Flemish abandoned his campaign in the north and returned to Europe, while Baldwin consolidated his position in Jerusalem, cultivating his sister Sibylla and assuring her that she would rule in the future on behalf of her infant son Baldwin, should he die without a direct heir. As he came of age, he began to assert his authority more clearly. During his reign, Jerusalem remained a relatively religiously tolerant city and a multicultural entity, reflecting his upbringing among Arab scholars and physicians, and his intellectual inclinations that, like his father and uncle, made him more of a learned king than a pure warrior. However, Montgesard's victory was not repeated. The Crusaders' losses were not quickly recovered, while Saladin regained the initiative. In 1179, after a campaign led by Baldwin into Syria, the Battle of Marj Ayyun took place near Sidon, where the tide suddenly turned in favour of the Ayyubids. Baldwin was nearly killed after being thrown from his horse and unable to remount without assistance, barely escaping. Many were killed or captured, including the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Odo of Saint-Amand, who later died in prison. The defeat was a major setback that forced the Crusaders back onto the defensive by the early 1180s. Saladin capitalized on the momentum and attacked the fortress of Chastelet at Jacob's Fork on the Jordan River, a fortress Baldwin had ordered to be built. After a brief siege in August 1179, the fortress was breached, hundreds of Crusaders were killed or captured, and the fortifications were destroyed. Despite subsequent plagues afflicting Saladin's army, the blow to Jerusalem was devastating. Domestically, Baldwin sought to consolidate his power and garner support. Guy de Lusignan, who married Sibylla in 1180 with the backing of the king and his mother Agnes, emerged to provide new political backing in the wake of the defeats. Externally, missions were sent to Byzantium and the Latin West seeking aid, but the death of Emperor Manuel I and the complexities of European politics hampered the response. Pope Alexander III even blamed Baldwin's illness for the defeats, in a harsh tone that likely prompted William of Tyre to write his history in defence of his protégé. Nevertheless, the early 1180s saw a relative improvement. An alliance was forged with Raymond of Tripoli, and the Crusader armies met Saladin at La Forte in 1182, achieving a significant victory. Another attack on Beirut was thwarted, and Renaud de Chatillon resumed his raids on caravan routes, even launching Crusader ships into the Red Sea near the Gulf of Aqaba, an unprecedented act of aggression. In the early 1180s, Crusader raids on Islamic shipping and trade extended from Yemen in the south to the fringes of Saladin's territory in the north. By 1183, a Christian force had reached the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, a day's journey from Medina. Thus, after the setbacks of 1179 and papal criticism, the years 1182-1183 saw a relative resurgence of Crusader power. However, this military improvement coincided with a tragic decline in the health of Baldwin IV. By 1182, leprosy had reached a severe stage. He nearly lost his sight, his limbs were paralyzed, and he could no longer use his hands or feet without assistance. William of Tyre describes this painful decline, emphasizing that the king, despite his sores and increasing infirmity, refused to relinquish his crown. Nevertheless, he remained steadfast. When he could no longer ride a horse, he continued campaigns carried on a litter, and even in his illness he attended councils in Jerusalem, where in 1183 a general tax was levied to finance the defence. Baldwin did not hide his face. He faced everyone with his true self, and it was clear to the senior commanders that his days were numbered. In 1184, as his illness worsened, Baldwin solidified the co-rule arrangement by making his young nephew, Baldwin V, a nominal co-king, which effectively expanded the influence of Sibylla and her husband, Guy de Lusignan. However, his relationship with Guy was strained. He displayed cruelty and contempt for the ailing king, committing errors that nearly led to disaster, from threatening Kerak Castle to a massacre of allied Bedouin tribes. Seeking to overcome internal divisions and secure external support, Baldwin launched his final efforts toward the Latin West, dispatching Patriarch Heraclius with senior knights bearing the keys to Jerusalem and its treasures, hoping for a Western prince to share the throne and ensure a peaceful transfer of power. But the European promises proved empty. Heraclius returned in 1185 with an unfulfilled English promise, and by then Baldwin had died in the spring of that same year, before reaching the age of 24. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre alongside his ancestors, and his infant nephew Baldwin V succeeded him under the regency of Raymond of Tripoli. Only a year later the child died under mysterious circumstances, and power passed to Sibylla and Guy, a transition that paved the way for an inevitable clash with Saladin. The war reignited, culminating in the defeat at Hattin in 1187, where Guy of Ariel was captured and Renaud de Chatillon was killed. Jerusalem fell after a brief siege, ending nearly a century of Crusader rule. This historical upheaval prompted the Third Crusade, led by the great European monarchs, but it failed to recapture the city. Over the decades, the Crusader cause declined until the fall of Acre in 1291, bringing an end to the Crusader states. Baldwin IV's reign was complex and fraught with challenges. A young, ailing king with no heir, beset by external threats and internal divisions. Nevertheless, he achieved decisive successes, most notably at Montgesard, halted the Muslim advance for crucial years, and earned the respect of his contemporaries. However, his short life and the lack of early Western support precipitated a series of crises that followed his death. The question remains, had he lived longer and been in better health, could he have united the Crusader ranks and prevented the fall of Jerusalem? Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.